I reported our lead surgeon for being drunk before a 12-year-old's heart surgery. So the hospital destroyed my career with false accusations and security footage of me stealing drugs that never happened, until the girl's mom turned out to be a senior partner at the state's biggest medical malpractice firm, and we exposed 5 years of cover-ups that sent the surgeon and hospital CEO to prison, while I got millions and now train nurses how to report drunk doctors without getting their lives ruined. Our whole nursing team was scrubbing in when Dr. Okafor stumbled through the door. His eyes couldn't focus and he reeked of alcohol. This was our lead surgeon, the man scheduled to perform open heart surgery on a 12-year-old girl in 20 minutes. I watched all the other nurses keep their heads down and just stare at the floor. Nobody wanted to acknowledge what we were seeing, but I couldn't stand it. I stripped off my gloves and rushed out to find Dr. Nakamura, our chief medical officer. She and Okafor went way back to med school. Their families vacation together every summer. Doctor, Okafor is intoxicated, I told her. He can't operate on that little girl. Nakamura didn't even bother looking up from her computer. That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof? I can smell it on him. His hands are shaking. Please, just come see for yourself. She leaned back in her chair and literally smiled. Doctor, Okafor brings in millions of dollars a year to this hospital. Why would I risk that? Her voice turned cold. Besides, this is just clearly petty revenge. Everyone knows you've had it out for him since that little incident last year. My stomach dropped. You see, last year, Okafor had cornered me in the supply closet after a late surgery. He'd pressed himself against me and backed me into the shelves, then tried to kiss me. When I pushed him away and told him I'd report him, he stroked my hair, then left. The next day, the entire hospital was buzzing with rumors about how I'd thrown myself at him, and he had to gently turn me down because he was married. Get back to that OR right now, Nakamura ordered, and if you spread these lies to anyone else, I'll make sure you never work in healthcare again. I returned to find the anesthesiologist, Dr. Yamoto, already prepping the patient. She caught my eye, and I saw that she knew. She'd positioned herself to steady Okafor's elbow as he approached the table. During the timeout before surgery began, I made one last attempt. I pulled her aside. I begged her to help me stop this surgery, to save this child's life. But then I noticed something that made my world stop. She had an engagement ring on her finger. It was the engagement ring Okafor's wife had worn for 20 years before she left him after I told her what Okafor did to me. Dr. Yamoto told me that she knew this wasn't right, but she was his fiancé. And what kind of fiancé would she be if she ruined his career? We went back to the operating room, where I watched her hands shake as she prepared another syringe of medication. That's when I realized she was also medicating Okafor right there in the OR, microdosing benzos into his IV port to try to steady his hands just enough to operate. She kissed her fingers and pressed them to his shoulder before returning to her station. The surgery began minutes later. Of course, Okafor's hands trembled as he made the initial incision. Yamoto kept touching his arm to steady him, and the other surgeon assisting pretended not to notice when Okafor dropped an instrument. At one point, Okafor actually laughed and said, "Whoops, butterfingers today," like he was dropping car keys instead of surgical instruments inside a child's chest cavity. Everything fell apart during the grafting. His impaired motor control caused him to nick the left anterior descending artery. Blood flooded the field instantly. "Clamp! Clamp!" the assisting surgeon shouted, pushing Okafor aside to take over, but Okafor pushed back. "I've got it! I've got it!" He was still trying to operate while the child bled out. The room erupted in chaos. More surgeons rushed in. Units of blood arrived. The perfusionist worked frantically to keep the bypass machine functioning while they tried to repair the damage. I remember locking eyes with the child's mother in the observation window. Her face had gone white with horror. Tears were streaming down her face as she watched her daughter's blood pool on the floor. We managed to save the little girl, but barely. She'd need a heart transplant now. The damage was too severe. What should have been a routine repair became a death sentence. After we closed, Nakamura herself came to the OR. She actually patted Okafor on the back. "Tough case. These things happen. We'll handle the family." Then she turned to all of us. "I don't need to remind you about confidentiality. We stand together or we fall apart. Anyone who suggests this was anything other than an unforeseeable complication will face immediate termination and legal action." Just like that, we were all ushered out. I remember pure rage overcame me because of how unfair this was. But then the next morning, something happened. Multiple lawyers arrived at the hospital. They served Okafor in the parking lot. Nakamura got served during morning rounds, Yamoto in the cafeteria. I got served papers too, but mine were different. They came with a handwritten note. "Thank you for trying. Please be my star witness." I asked around confused about where these papers came from. I couldn't understand it, but then I got my answer, and a crazy, childlike glee came over me. Turns out the child's mother, the woman in the observatory room, wasn't just a regular person. She was a senior partner at the biggest medical malpractice firm in the state, and she was ready to make our hospital pay. The next few days became a nightmare of professional sabotage. My schedule changed 3 times without warning. I showed up for my regular cardiac unit shift to find myself reassigned to pediatric overflow, then geriatrics, then the emergency department. Each time I arrived at a new unit, the charge nurse looked confused. Nobody had requested me. The assignments always came directly from Nakamura's office. My access badge started malfunctioning. Doors that should have opened for me stayed locked. The medication dispensary rejected my fingerprint 5 times before finally accepting it. It claimed there were system glitches, but only my credentials seemed affected. When I tried to access patient records to document the surgery incident, my computer froze. The screen went black, then displayed an error message about unauthorized access attempts. Other nurses began avoiding me. Conversations stopped when I entered break rooms. People who had worked alongside me for years suddenly found reasons to take different elevators. During shift changes, nobody would give me proper handoff reports. They mumbled through patient updates while looking at the floor, then rushed away. I ate lunch alone in the parking garage because the cafeteria had become unbearable. The rumors started small but spread fast. First, someone claimed I had been drinking before my shift. Then the story evolved into me showing up intoxicated multiple times. By the end of the week, people whispered that I had a substance abuse problem and was trying to deflect blame onto Dr. Okafor. Someone left an AA pamphlet in my locker. Another person taped the Employee Assistance Program hotline number to my car windshield. My patient assignments became increasingly difficult. Every shift, I got the most challenging cases. Combative dementia patients who required constant redirection, fresh post-ops with multiple drains and complex wound care, patients with extensive isolation precautions that required full PPE for every interaction. The assignment Assignments that usually rotated fairly among staff all landed on me. By the end of each shift, my back ached and my feet throbbed. Documentation became a minefield. Notes I had written disappeared from the electronic medical record. Entries I never made appeared under my login. One morning, I found a note claiming I had administered the wrong medication dose to a patient I had never even treated. When I reported it to the charge nurse, she shrugged and suggested I must have forgotten. The IT department insisted there was no evidence of tampering. My mother noticed the strain immediately when I visited her office. She practiced family law, not medical malpractice, but she had connections throughout the legal community. Her small downtown office smelled like coffee and old books. She listened while I explained everything, her expression growing darker with each detail. She made phone calls while I sat there. Her voice stayed professional, but I could see her jaw tightening. After the third call, she hung up and looked at me. The mother from the surgery already contacted several firms. She wants you specifically as a witness. They're building a case, but they need documentation. I explained about my computer access problems and the disappearing notes. My mother grabbed a legal pad and started writing. Document everything by hand. Times, dates, witnesses. Keep copies at home. Take photos of your handwritten notes before leaving them at work. Create backup documentation they can't erase. The next morning, I arrived early to implement her advice. I started carrying a small notebook, writing down every interaction and incident. When my badge failed at the cardiac unit door, I noted the time and which security guard had to manually override the system. When my patient assignment included 4 high acuity cases, while other nurses had 2, I documented the disparity. During morning huddle, Nakamura appeared unexpectedly. She never attended staff meetings but stood in the doorway watching me. When discussing patient safety protocols, she interrupted to remind everyone about the importance of mental fitness for duty while staring directly at me. Several nurses shifted uncomfortably, but nobody spoke up. After the meeting, I found my locker emptied onto the break room floor. My personal items scattered everywhere. My extra scrubs lay in a puddle of spilled coffee. Someone had torn pages from my nursing reference books. My stethoscope, a graduation gift from my mother, was missing entirely. Security claimed the cameras in that area were under maintenance. Dr. Yamoto started appearing wherever I worked. She would arrive at my patient rooms right as I prepared medications, watching me with crossed arms. During one medication pass, she questioned every single substance I administered, demanding to know dosages and indications as if I were a first-year student. When I answered correctly each time, she looked disappointed. The intimidation escalated when I worked night shifts. My car tires were deflated twice in 1 week. Security insisted it must be coincidence. Strange calls came to the unit asking for me, but when I answered, the line went dead. Once, I found a printed photo of my apartment building tucked under my windshield wiper with no note or explanation. I started varying my routes home and parking in different spots. My mother suggested installing a doorbell camera, which I did immediately. The first night, it captured someone in scrubs approaching my door at 3 a.m., standing there for several minutes, then leaving without knocking. The figure's face stayed carefully turned away from the camera. Some nurses began showing subtle support despite the pressure. Sarah, who worked pediatric ICU, started eating lunch in the parking garage with me. She didn't say much, but her presence meant everything. Tom from the emergency department began, accidentally, leaving copies of policies and procedures on the break room table when I was there, highlighting sections about whistleblower protections. During a particularly brutal shift, I was assigned to float between 3 different units. The constant running between floors left me exhausted. In the cardiac step-down unit, I found Dr. Okafor reviewing charts at the nurse's station. He looked up when I approached, his eyes clear for once. "Heard you've been having some difficulties," he said, voice casual but threatening. "Shame about your computer access. These systems can be so unreliable." He closed the chart he was reading. "You know, good nurses focus on patient care, not causing trouble." I continued preparing medications without responding. He stood, moving closer until I could smell his cologne mixed with something sharper. Alcohol again, even though it was barely noon. "That little girl is getting excellent care now. Sometimes complications lead to better outcomes. Wouldn't want anyone suggesting otherwise." My hand stayed steady as I drew up insulin, double-checking the dose. He waited for a response that never came, then finally walked away. I documented the interaction immediately in my notebook, including the time and the fact that the charge nurse had witnessed it from across the station. The law firm representing the girl's mother contacted me through my mother's office. They needed my detailed account of the surgery and the cover-up attempts. I met with them after a night shift, exhausted but determined. The lead attorney, a woman named Patricia Chen, took notes while I spoke. She asked specific questions about who was present, what was said, and what I had observed. "We need documentation," she explained. "The hospital will claim this was a standard complication. Your testimony is crucial, but we need supporting evidence." I showed her my handwritten notes and the photos I had been taking. She nodded approvingly. "Keep doing this. Document everything, no matter how small." Back at the hospital, the retaliation intensified. My annual performance review, which had always been excellent, suddenly showed up with needs improvement ratings in multiple categories. The comments mentioned difficulty working with team members and resistance to feedback. I had never seen the review before it was finalized and filed with HR. My nursing license renewal faced unexpected delays. The state board claimed they needed additional documentation about my fitness to practice based on recent concerns. When I called to ask what concerns, they couldn't provide specifics, but suggested I might want to seek legal counsel. My mother connected me with a licensing attorney immediately. The breaking point came during a night shift in the ICU. I was caring for a post-operative patient when their vital signs began deteriorating. I called for help and started appropriate interventions. Dr. Okafor appeared, insisting on taking over. His hands shook as he examined the patient. I could smell alcohol again, stronger than before. I stepped back but stayed in the room, documenting everything. He ordered medications that seemed inappropriate for the situation. When I questioned the doses, he snapped that I should follow orders or find another job. The charge nurse appeared, saw what was happening, and quietly called another physician for a second opinion. Dr. Patel arrived within minutes, took one look at the situation, and smoothly took control. He stabilized the patient while Okafor stood there swaying slightly. Nobody said anything directly, but Patel's presence prevented a potential disaster. After Okafor left, Patel turned to me. "Document everything you observed, every detail." The next morning, I found my car keyed in the parking lot. Deep scratches ran along both sides. Security shrugged and mentioned the cameras were still being repaired. I took photos and filed a police report, though I knew nothing would come of it. The message was clear. clear. They wanted me gone, but something was shifting. More nurses began quietly supporting me. They couldn't speak openly, but small gestures showed solidarity. Extra supplies appeared in my patient rooms when I was overwhelmed. Difficult patients were mysteriously reassigned. Someone always seemed to be nearby when Okafor or Yamoto approached me. My mother arranged a meeting with Patricia Chen and her full legal team. They had been building their case methodically. Other families had come forward with concerns about surgeries Okafor had performed. Former nurses who had left the hospital were willing to testify about the culture of cover-ups. My documentation provided crucial contemporary evidence. We're going to depose you next week, Patricia explained. They'll try to discredit you, bring up the rumors, question your motivations. Be prepared for that. But we have evidence on our side. She showed me security footage from the surgery day that someone had preserved before it could be deleted. It clearly showed Okafor's impaired state. The hospital administration must have sensed the walls closing in. Nakamura called an all-staff meeting about maintaining unity during challenging times. She spoke about loyalty and the importance of supporting colleagues. Her eyes found me repeatedly during the speech. The message was clear, but it was too late. That night, I worked what I didn't know would be my last shift for a while. Everything seemed normal until I received an urgent page to Nakamura's office. When I arrived, she sat behind her desk with the head of HR and hospital legal counsel. They informed me I was being placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into patient care concerns. I asked for specifics, but they remained vague. Something about documentation discrepancies and reports from concerned colleagues. They demanded my badge and keys immediately. Security would escort me to clean out my locker. I wasn't allowed to return to my unit or say goodbye to my patients. As security walked me through the hospital, nurses watched from doorways. Some looked away, but others met my eyes with understanding. Sarah pressed a note into my hand as I passed. Tom nodded from the elevator. Even staff I barely knew seemed to recognize what was happening. My mother was waiting in the parking lot. She had received a call from Patricia Chen, who had somehow already heard about my suspension. We sat in her car while I shook with anger and exhaustion. Everything I had worked for, my entire career, was being destroyed because I tried to protect a child. This is exactly what we expected, my mother said calmly. They're panicking. Patricia says this actually helps the case. It shows consciousness of guilt, a pattern of retaliation. You did everything right. Now we let the legal system work. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by boxes of documentation, photos of tampered schedules, handwritten notes about every incident, printed emails showing the timeline of events. My phone buzzed with messages from colleagues who had finally found the courage to reach out. Each one had their own story about Okafor, Nakamura, or the toxic culture that protected them. The deposition was scheduled for the following week. Patricia's team prepared me thoroughly, but I still felt nervous. Everything depended on telling the truth clearly and completely. The little girl still waited for a heart transplant because I hadn't acted fast enough, hadn't pushed hard enough. This was my chance to make it right. As I organized my evidence one more time, I thought about all the patients who had suffered in silence, all the nurses who had been too scared to speak up, all the families who trusted us with their loved ones only to be betrayed by a system that valued money over lives. The fear that had paralyzed me for so long transformed into determination. They had taken my job, but not my voice. They had tried to destroy my reputation, but only revealed their own corruption. The mother in the observation window had seen everything, and now she was making sure everyone else would see it too. Justice might move slowly, but it was coming. My phone rang. Patricia Chen's voice was professional, but I could hear excitement underneath. We just received word that 2 more nurses want to provide statements. Former employees who left because of similar situations. This is bigger than just one surgery. Are you ready for this? I looked at my nursing license hanging on the wall, thought about the oath I had taken to do no harm and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Yes, I told her. I'm ready. The deposition preparation consumed the next 3 days. Patricia Chen's team worked with me in a conference room filled with binders and legal documents. They ran through potential questions, teaching me to answer precisely without volunteering extra information. My mother sat beside me, taking notes and offering suggestions based on her own legal experience. How did Sarah know exactly when to be in that parking garage for lunch? The timing of all these supportive gestures seems so perfectly coordinated. I'm really curious about whether the nurses had some kind of secret communication system going on behind the scenes. During breaks, I checked my phone constantly. Messages from hospital colleagues painted a disturbing picture. Nakamura had announced a mandatory ethics training for all nursing staff, emphasizing proper channels for concerns and consequences of false accusations. The subtext was clear to everyone. Sarah texted me photos of the new policies posted throughout the hospital. One required all staff to report disruptive behavior from colleagues immediately. Another outlined expanded grounds for immediate termination, including undermining hospital leadership and creating a hostile work environment. The language was vague enough to target anyone who spoke up. The night before my deposition, I couldn't sleep. I reviewed my notes again, checking dates and times against my documentation. Around midnight, my doorbell camera alerted me to movement. A figure in dark clothing approached my door, left an envelope, and hurried away. I waited until morning to retrieve it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with typed words: "Withdraw your testimony. This is your only warning." No signature, no identifying marks. I photographed it immediately and forwarded the image to Patricia Chen. She responded within minutes, advising me to file another police report and vary my routine even more. The deposition took place in a sterile conference room downtown. Nakamura's legal team consisted of 3 attorneys in expensive suits. They started with seemingly innocent questions about my employment history and training. Then they shifted to my history of conflicts with Dr. Okafor. They presented the false narrative expertly. According to their version, I had pursued Okafor romantically and became vindictive when rejected. They showed emails I had supposedly sent, though I had never written them. When I denied their authenticity, they questioned my memory and suggested I might be confused about many things. Patricia Chen objected repeatedly, but the damage was being done. They painted me as unstable, jealous, and prone to false accusations. They brought up the recent performance review, the concerns about my patient care, and the anonymous reports they had received about my behavior. Every piece of fabricated evidence built their case. The questioning turned to the surgery itself. They minimized Okafor's condition, suggesting I had exaggerated or misunderstood what I saw. They emphasized that complications happen in surgery, and that I lacked the expertise to judge a surgeon's performance. When I described the alcohol smell, they wondered aloud if I might have been projecting. After 6 hours, we broke for lunch. I sat in the bathroom stall, hands shaking with rage and exhaustion. Patricia found me there and reminded me that this was exactly what we expected. Their aggressive tactics showed desperation. She had been taking careful notes of every lie and fabrication. The afternoon session focused on my pattern of disruption at the hospital. They had statements from nurses I had never worked with, claiming I was difficult and paranoid. They presented a psychological evaluation I had supposedly failed, though I had never taken one. The forged documents were sophisticated and detailed. When they finally finished, Patricia Chen began her redirect. She methodically dismantled their narrative, pointing out inconsistencies and impossibilities in their timeline. She presented my actual employment records, showing years of exemplary service. She had obtained statements from dozens of nurses supporting my character and professionalism. That evening, I met with several former colleagues at a coffee shop across town. They had all received similar treatment after questioning hospital practices. One nurse, Catherine, had reported medication errors she witnessed Okafor make while impaired. She was transferred to night shifts, then terminated for attendance issues that were fabricated. Another nurse, Sebastian, had tried to report Nakamura for pressuring staff to falsify patient satisfaction surveys. He found himself under investigation for supposed HIPAA violations. The charges were dropped eventually, but not before he lost his job and spent thousands on legal fees. The pattern was clear and devastating. We shared documentation and contact information, building an informal network of witnesses. Patricia Chen had been reaching out to many of them, constructing a broader case about the hospital's culture of intimidation. The lawsuit was growing beyond just one surgery gone wrong. My mother helped me apply for unemployment benefits and health insurance. The process was humiliating after years of steady employment. She also connected me with a therapist who specialized in workplace trauma. I resisted at first, but the sessions helped me process the anger and betrayal I felt. Meanwhile, the hospital's campaign against me continued. I received calls from recruiters who suddenly withdrew job opportunities after checking references. My professional social media accounts were flooded with anonymous negative comments. Someone had created fake profiles using my name and photo, posting inappropriate content. Tom from the emergency department met me secretly one evening. He brought copies of internal emails showing Nakamura directing HR to handle the situation aggressively. There were discussions about filing criminal charges against me for theft of hospital property, though I had taken nothing. They were exploring every avenue to destroy my credibility. He also revealed that Dr. Yamoto was struggling. She had been making medication errors, arriving late, and crying in supply closets. The pressure of maintaining the lie while working alongside Okafor was breaking her down. Several nurses had reported concerns about her mental state, but Nakamura protected her too. Patricia Chen's team filed additional motions as more evidence emerged. They sought to preserve electronic records before the hospital could delete them. They demanded access to security footage from multiple dates. They subpoenaed communication records between Nakamura and hospital board members. The hospital's legal team responded by accusing me of orchestrating a conspiracy to extort money. They claimed I had recruited other disgruntled employees to fabricate stories. They suggested my mother, as an attorney, had coached me on how to build a false case. The accusations were absurd, but required formal responses. My savings dwindled as weeks passed without income. I sold jewelry and electronics to cover rent. My mother offered to help financially, but I knew she had her own expenses. The stress affected my health. I lost weight, developed insomnia, and had constant headaches. One morning, I woke to find my car vandalized again. This time, someone had poured sugar in the gas tank. The repair would cost more than the car was worth. I started using public transportation, adding hours to my daily routine. Every setback felt calculated to break my resolve. Sarah called with disturbing news. The hospital had hired a private investigator to follow me. She had overheard Nakamura discussing it with HR. They were looking for anything to discredit me, following my movements, photographing who I met with, documenting my daily activities. I started noticing the same car in different locations. A man with a camera appeared wherever I went. I felt paranoid, but knew it wasn't imagination. Patricia Chen advised me to document everything but continue living normally. Let them waste resources following someone who had nothing to hide. The investigation expanded when Patricia's team discovered a pattern. Over 5 years, 12 nurses had filed formal complaints about Dr. Okafor's behavior or impairment. All 12 had left the hospital within months of reporting. Their files showed similar patterns of retaliation, fabricated performance issues, and forced resignations. 3 of those nurses had reported sexual harassment or assault. Their complaints had been buried, dismissed as misunderstandings or false accusations. 2 had signed non-disclosure agreements in exchange for small settlements. The 3rd had been threatened with lawsuits until she dropped her complaint. We tracked down 8 of the 12 nurses. Each told variations of the same story. They witnessed Okafor impaired, reported it, and faced systematic destruction of their careers. Nakamura had personally overseen the retaliation in most cases. The hospital's legal team had refined their tactics over years. The mother of the injured child, despite her legal expertise, faced her own challenges. The hospital tried to transfer her daughter to another facility, claiming they couldn't provide adequate care. She had to fight to keep her daughter at the hospital while waiting for a transplant. Every day brought new bureaucratic obstacles. Patricia Chen filed a motion to expand the lawsuit into a class action. The hospital's attorneys fought viciously against it, knowing it would open them to massive liability. The legal maneuvering consumed weeks of hearings and filings. Each side presented arguments about patterns of behavior versus isolated incidents. During this time, something unexpected happened. Dr. Patel reached out through my mother. He wanted to meet privately but was terrified of retaliation. We arranged to meet at a park outside the city. He arrived looking haggard, constantly checking over his shoulder. He revealed that he had been documenting Okafor's impairment for 2 years. He had photos, videos, and detailed notes about incidents where he had to take over surgeries or correct dangerous orders. He had been building evidence, waiting for the right moment to act. My situation had given him hope, but he was scared. He had a family, medical school loans, and a visa tied to his employment. The hospital had made it clear that foreign doctors who caused problems would find their immigration status questioned. He wanted to help but needed protection. Patricia Chen couldn't guarantee. Private investigators following a nurse who exposed a drunk surgeon. The hospital's spending more on cover-ups than they probably did on that failed surgery. We developed a system for him to share information anonymously. He would leave USB drives with encrypted files at predetermined locations. I would retrieve them and pass them to Patricia's team. The evidence he provided was damning, showing dozens of of cases where Okafor's impairment had endangered patients. The stress on Yamato became visible to everyone. She lost weight dramatically. Her hands shook during procedures, and she snapped at colleagues. Nurses whispered about her deteriorating condition. Some sympathized, knowing she was trapped. Others resented her complicity in the cover-up. One night, she appeared at my apartment. She looked terrible, with dark circles under her eyes and trembling hands. She begged me to stop the lawsuit, claiming it would destroy Okafor and, by extension, her. She offered me money, promising to mortgage her house if necessary. I listened to her pleas without responding. She talked about loving Okafor despite his flaws, about trying to help him get better, about the pressure she felt to protect him. She admitted to the medication tampering during surgeries, justifying it as harm reduction. She was deep in denial about enabling his dangerous behavior. When she finally left, I added our interaction to my documentation. Patricia Chen found it significant that Yamato had admitted to the medication tampering. It showed consciousness of guilt and could be crucial evidence, but I felt sick watching another healthcare professional destroyed by this toxic system. The hospital board finally took notice as media outlets began investigating. While we had avoided publicity initially, the pattern of abuse was too significant to ignore. Reporters submitted freedom of information requests, interviewed former employees, and pieced together the story. Nakamura held emergency meetings about controlling the narrative. New policies appeared weekly. Staff were forbidden from speaking to media without approval. Social media guidelines became restrictive. Anyone caught disparaging the hospital faced immediate termination. The atmosphere grew more oppressive as administrators tried to maintain control. Tom reported that morale had plummeted. Nurses were transferring to other hospitals in record numbers. Patient satisfaction scores dropped as stressed staff struggled to provide quality care. The toxic culture Nakamura had protected was destroying the hospital from within. My deposition continued over multiple sessions as new evidence emerged. Each time, the hospital's attorneys grew more aggressive. They attacked my character, my competence, and my motives. They presented new fabricated evidence, including psychiatric evaluations suggesting I had personality disorders. Patricia Chen countered each attack methodically. She had assembled a team of experts who testified about standard medical practices, appropriate responses to impaired physicians, and the hospital's deviation from accepted protocols. Their testimony supported everything I had reported. The financial pressure mounted. I moved to a smaller apartment, sold my furniture, and relied on food banks. My mother helped when she could, but I hated being dependent. The hospital's strategy seemed designed to exhaust my resources and force me to abandon the fight. Then Catherine, the nurse who had reported Okafor years earlier, provided a breakthrough. She had secretly recorded conversations with Nakamura during her termination process. The audio quality was poor, but Nakamura's voice was clear as she threatened Catherine and admitted protecting Okafor because of his revenue generation. Patricia's team authenticated the recordings through voice analysis. They filed them as evidence despite the hospital's objections about admissibility. Even if they couldn't be used in court, they provided leverage for negotiations. The hospital's position was weakening. More families came forward, parents whose children had suffered complications during Okafor's surgeries, adults who had experienced post-operative infections or injuries that seemed suspicious in retrospect. Not all were provable malpractice, but the pattern was undeniable. Dr. Patel's evidence revealed the worst cases. A patient who died from a preventable error when Okafor insisted on operating despite visible impairment. A teenager who suffered permanent nerve damage from a botched procedure. An elderly woman who experienced organ failure after Okafor prescribed contraindicated medications. Each case had been explained away as an unfortunate complication. Families had been told these things happen sometimes. The medical records had been carefully written to hide the true causes. Only someone with inside knowledge could connect the dots. The pressure finally broke Dr. Yamato. She was found unconscious in an on-call room after overdosing on the same medications she had been giving Okafor. She survived but required intensive care. The incident couldn't be hidden from staff, though administrators tried to minimize it. Her sewer slide attempt shook even loyal employees. Nurses who had stayed silent began questioning their complicity. Some reached out to Patricia's team, offering to testify. The wall of silence Nakamura had built was cracking. During her recovery, Yamato's parents flew in from across the country. They were horrified to learn about their daughter's involvement in the cover-up. They hired their own attorney and indicated she might cooperate with our case in exchange for immunity from prosecution. The hospital board called an emergency meeting. Several members had been unaware of the extent of Nakamura's protection of Okafor. They ordered an independent investigation, though Nakamura tried to control its scope. The investigator they hired had a reputation for thoroughness. Meanwhile, my professional life remained in limbo. Every job application resulted in rejection after reference checks. My nursing license was under review based on the hospital's complaints. I volunteered at free clinics to maintain my skills, but the uncertainty was crushing. Patricia Chen's team prepared for the next phase. They had enough evidence to proceed to trial, but the hospital would likely seek a settlement to avoid publicity. The question was whether the offer would include systemic changes or just financial compensation. I wanted more than money. I wanted Okafor's license revoked, Nakamura removed from her position, and policies implemented to protect future whistleblowers. Patricia warned me that settlements often included non-disclosure agreements that would silence me forever. The independent investigation interviewed dozens of current and former employees. Their preliminary findings supported our allegations. They found evidence of systematic retaliation, cover-ups of medical errors, and failure to address physician impairment. The hospital's liability was massive. Nakamura tried to control the damage by firing lower-level administrators, claiming they had failed to report problems. She positioned herself as a victim of poor communication, but the investigators weren't fooled. They traced decisions directly to her office. As winter approached, the legal proceedings intensified. Depositions continued with hospital board members, department heads, and additional witnesses. Each revelation added to the mountain of evidence. The hospital's insurance company began pressuring for settlement. My support network grew stronger. The nurses who had suffered similar retaliation formed a support group. We met weekly to share experiences and encourage each other. Some had found new jobs and offered to help with references. Others were still fighting their own battles. The little girl at the center of the original incident remained on the transplant list. Her condition was stable but fragile. Her mother provided updates during our legal meetings. Every delay in justice meant more time this child spent waiting for a heart that might come too late. Patricia Chen presented the settlement demand. It included financial compensation compensation for all affected nurses, funding for an independent monitor to oversee hospital practices, mandatory reporting of physician impairment, and whistleblower protections. Most importantly, it required the termination of both Okafor and Nakamura. The hospital's initial response was predictable. They offered a fraction of the financial demand and refused any admission of wrongdoing. They wouldn't agree to personnel changes or oversight. They wanted silence in exchange for money. We rejected their offer unanimously. The group of affected nurses stood united. We had lost careers, savings, and peace of mind. We wouldn't accept a deal that allowed the same patterns to continue. Patricia prepared for trial, knowing it would mean more months of uncertainty. Then Dr. Patel made a brave decision. He agreed to testify openly, despite the risks to his career and immigration status. His detailed documentation and first-hand accounts would be devastating to the hospital's defense. Other doctors began indicating they might follow his lead. The hospital's board faced a crisis. Their stock price dropped as news coverage increased. Major insurance companies threatened to cancel contracts. The state health department announced an investigation. The empire Nakamura had built on lies and intimidation was collapsing. In a last desperate move, Nakamura tried to frame me for stealing controlled substances. Security footage mysteriously appeared showing someone who looked like me accessing the medication room without authorization. The timestamp corresponded to a day I hadn't worked. Patricia's team quickly exposed the deception. The real footage from that day showed I was at a deposition downtown. The fabricated video was a crude attempt that insulted everyone's intelligence. It demonstrated the lengths Nakamura would go to protect herself. The state nursing board expedited their review of my license. With Patricia's help, I presented evidence of the hospital's retaliation. Yamamoto showing up at Sarah's door like some midnight medication fairy, offering to mortgage her house while defending her drunk boyfriend. That's taking Stand By Your Man to a whole new level of denial right there. The board members were appalled by the systematic harassment. They cleared me of all charges and opened their own investigation into the hospital's practices. As momentum shifted in our favor, more truth emerged. Okafor had been reported to the state medical board 3 times over 10 years. Each time, Nakamura had intervened, using hospital resources to defend him and discredit accusers. The pattern of protection went deeper than anyone realized. My financial situation reached a breaking point. I faced eviction despite my mother's help. The stress affected my physical health severely, but giving up wasn't an option. Too many people were counting on this case to create change. Then, an unexpected ally emerged. A wealthy philanthropist who had lost his wife to medical malpractice read about our case. He established a fund to support healthcare whistleblowers, providing grants to cover living expenses during legal battles. It was a lifeline when I needed it most. The hospital made a new settlement offer as trial approached. It included most of our demands, but still protected Nakamura. She would receive a generous severance package and keep her medical license. It was better, but not enough. We prepared for trial with renewed determination. Patricia's team organized the evidence meticulously. Witnesses were prepared to testify despite ongoing intimidation attempts. The truth would finally be heard in court. The weekend before trial was scheduled to begin, Yamamoto reached out through her attorney. She was ready to tell the truth about everything, including details we didn't know. Her testimony would be the final piece needed to expose the full scope of corruption. She revealed that Nakamura had been taking kickbacks from pharmaceutical companies in exchange for promoting their substances. Okafor had been performing unnecessary surgeries to boost revenue. The fraud went beyond covering up impairment to active criminal conduct. Patricia Chen immediately notified law enforcement. What had started as a medical malpractice case was becoming a criminal investigation. Federal agents interviewed witnesses and seized records. The scope kept expanding as more evidence emerged. Faced with potential criminal charges, the hospital board finally acted decisively. They fired Nakamura without severance and reported Okafor to the state medical board. They agreed to all our settlement demands and added provisions we hadn't even requested. But the victory felt incomplete as I sat in my empty apartment, surrounded by legal documents. My career was in ruins, my savings gone, my faith in healthcare shaken. Justice was coming, but at such a high personal cost. The other nurses in our group felt similarly conflicted. We had won, but what had we really gained? Some were too traumatized to return to nursing. Others struggled with guilt about not speaking up sooner. The psychological wounds would take years to heal. Still, there were glimmers of hope. Young nurses reached out, thanking us for creating change. Hospitals across the state began reviewing their whistleblower policies. Medical schools started teaching about the importance of reporting impaired colleagues. The little girl received her heart transplant 2 weeks before Christmas. Her mother sent photos of her recovery, smiling despite the surgical scars. She would live because we had fought for justice, even when it cost us everything. As I prepared for the final settlement conference, I reflected on the journey. The system had tried to crush me for telling the truth, but with support from unexpected allies and determination born from righteous anger, we had prevailed. The conference would determine specific amounts and implementation timelines. Monitors would oversee the hospital's compliance. New policies would protect future whistleblowers. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was progress. I looked at my nursing license, still valid despite everything they had tried. My career would recover eventually. The other nurses and I would heal and move forward. Most importantly, patients would be safer because we had refused to stay silent. Patricia Chen called with final details. The hospital wanted to settle before markets opened Monday. They would admit wrongdoing, implement all requested changes, and compensate everyone fairly. Nakamura faced criminal charges. Okafor would never practice medicine again. Tomorrow would bring resolution to this chapter of our lives. But tonight, I sat with my mother and the other nurses who had become like family. We had faced down a corrupt system and won. The cost was high, but the victory was real. The truth had finally prevailed. The settlement conference was scheduled for Monday morning. I spent the weekend organizing my documentation one final time, arranging every piece of evidence chronologically. My hands trembled as I sorted through photos of falsified schedules, handwritten notes documenting each incident of retaliation, and printed emails showing the systematic campaign against me. Sunday evening, Patricia Chen called to review final strategy. She explained that the hospital's board had authorized their legal team to settle at almost any cost. The criminal investigation had terrified them. Federal agents were still seizing records and interviewing staff. Board members who had been unaware of Nakamura's actions were scrambling to distance themselves. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that little girl's blood pooling on the operating room floor. I thought about all the other patients Dr. Okafor had endangered while administrators protected him, the weight of what we had uncovered pressed down on me. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. I dressed in my only remaining professional outfit, the others having been sold to cover rent. My mother picked me up early, and we drove to the law firm in silence. She reached over and squeezed my hand as we pulled into the parking garage. The conference room was already crowded when we arrived. Patricia Chen's team occupied one side of the massive table. The hospital's attorneys filled the other side, along with several board members I recognized. Notably absent were Nakamura and Okafor, both now facing their own legal battles. The lead hospital attorney began by reading a prepared statement. The board acknowledged systemic failures in addressing physician impairment and protecting whistleblowers. They accepted responsibility for the retaliation I and others had faced. The words sounded hollow after everything they had put us through. Patricia Chen responded with our demands. Every nurse who had been forced out after reporting concerns would receive full compensation for lost wages, damaged careers, and emotional distress. The hospital would fund an independent oversight committee for 5 years. Mandatory reporting protocols would be implemented immediately. Most importantly, they would establish a substantial fund for the little girl's ongoing medical care. The negotiations stretched through the morning. They haggled over amounts, timelines, and specific policy language. I sat quietly, letting Patricia handle the details. Several times, board members glanced at me with what looked like shame. They had finally understood the human cost of their willful blindness. During a break, I stepped outside for air. In the hallway, I encountered one of the hospital's attorneys, a woman who had aggressively questioned me during depositions. She approached hesitantly, then handed me an envelope. Inside was a personal check and a handwritten note apologizing for her role in attacking my credibility. She walked away before I could respond. Back in the conference room, they presented the final settlement terms. The compensation exceeded our original demands. The oversight provisions were stronger than we had hoped. They agreed to notify all patients who had been operated on by Okafor while impaired, opening themselves to additional lawsuits. It was complete capitulation, but one board member insisted on adding a provision. He wanted me to sign a non-disclosure agreement, preventing me from discussing the case publicly. Patricia Chen immediately objected, but I considered it. Part of me wanted to put this behind me forever. Another part knew that silence had enabled this tragedy. After heated discussion, we reached a compromise. I would agree not to seek media attention or write about the case for profit. However, I could speak freely in professional settings about the importance of reporting impaired physicians. I could testify if other nurses faced similar retaliation. The truth would not be silenced entirely. The signing took another hour. Each document required multiple signatures and notarizations. My hand cramped from writing my name repeatedly. With each signature, I felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. We had won, but the victory felt hollow compared to what we had lost. As we prepared to leave, the board chairman approached me directly. He was an elderly man who had served on the board for 20 years. His voice shook as he apologized personally for failing in his oversight duties. He promised that the hospital would truly change, that my sacrifice would protect future patients. Patricia Chen warned me that the settlement funds would take several weeks to process. In the meantime, she had arranged for an advance to cover my immediate needs. The check she handed me was more money than I had ever seen, yet it felt like poor compensation for my destroyed career. That afternoon, I met with the other nurses from our support group. We gathered at Catherine's apartment to share the news. Everyone would receive compensation, though amounts varied based on individual circumstances. More importantly, the systemic changes we had fought for would be implemented, but the mood was subdued. Sebastian talked about how he still had nightmares about his termination. Another nurse, Maria, had decided to leave healthcare entirely, too traumatized to return. I'm wondering how many nurses across the country face this same financial pressure when they try to report problems. Does this kind of support fund exist anywhere else? We had won the battle, but the war had left us all scarred. Catherine opened a bottle of wine, and we toasted to our perseverance. We had stood up to a corrupt system and won. Yet as I looked around the room at these brave colleagues, I saw the toll it had taken. Careers derailed, faith shattered, lives upended. Justice had come at an enormous price. The next few days brought a flurry of activity. The hospital announced Nakamura's termination and criminal charges in a carefully worded press release. They emphasized their commitment to patient safety and thanked employees who had come forward. They didn't mention the years of cover-ups or the lives destroyed. Dr. Okafor's medical license was formally revoked by the state board. The decision detailed multiple instances of practicing while impaired, sexual harassment, and patient endangerment. He faced criminal charges for the unnecessary surgeries Dr. Yamoto had revealed. His fall from grace was complete and deserved. Yamoto herself entered a plea agreement with prosecutors. In exchange for her testimony against Nakamura and Okafor, she received probation and mandatory counseling. Her medical license was suspended for 2 years. She would have to prove her rehabilitation before practicing again. I received a call from the mother whose daughter had needed the heart transplant. She thanked me for my courage in speaking up, even when it cost me everything. Her daughter was recovering well from the transplant surgery. She invited me to visit when the girl was stronger. I promised I would. The independent oversight committee began work immediately. They interviewed current staff, reviewed policies, and implemented new reporting systems. Tom, who had secretly supported me, was appointed as a staff liaison. He called to update me on the changes taking place. Several hospitals in the area reached out to Patricia Chen's firm, wanting to proactively address their own reporting systems. They had seen what happened when problems were ignored and wanted to avoid similar lawsuits. Our case was creating ripple effects throughout the healthcare community. My mother helped me look for new employment. My nursing license was clear, and the settlement had provided financial stability, but I wasn't ready to return to bedside nursing. The trauma was too fresh. Instead, I began exploring positions in healthcare advocacy and patient safety. One evening, Sarah called with unexpected news. The nursing staff had voted to dedicate the hospital's annual Excellence Award in my name. It would be given each year to a nurse who demonstrated exceptional moral courage. The administration had approved it as part of their reform efforts. I cried when she told me, not from joy, but from a complex mix of emotions I couldn't name. They were honoring me for doing what any nurse should do, protecting patients. The fact that it required exceptional courage showed how broken the system had been. Dr. Patel, who had risked everything to provide evidence, was promoted to a leadership position in the surgery department. He was tasked with implementing new protocols for monitoring physician fitness. He called to thank me for inspiring him to finally act on what he had known for years. The criminal trials moved forward slowly. Nakamura was charged with multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, conspiracy, and obstruction. Her assets were frozen, and she faced significant prison time. The woman who had wielded such power over us now appeared in court in handcuffs. I attended one hearing, needing to see her held accountable. She looked smaller than I remembered, her designer suits replaced by jail attire. When our eyes met across the courtroom, I saw no remorse, only anger at being caught. She still believed she had done nothing wrong. The settlement funds finally arrived. I paid off my debts, reimbursed my mother for her help, and set aside money for further education. The rest went into savings. I had learned how quickly financial security could disappear when you challenged powerful people. Patricia Chen invited me to speak at a medical ethics conference. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to relive the experience publicly, but thinking about all the nurses who might face similar situations, I agreed. My story could help others find the courage to speak up. The conference was held at a university medical center. I stood before an audience of healthcare professionals and students, my voice shaky at first. But as I told my story, I found strength in the truth. I explained how fear of retaliation silences healthcare workers, endangering patients. Afterward, dozens of attendees approached me. Some shared their own stories of witnessing impaired colleagues or facing retaliation. Others thanked me for giving them a framework for addressing such situations. A medical student said my talk had changed her perspective on professional obligations. I began receiving invitations to speak at other institutions. Nursing schools wanted me to address their students about ethical obligations. Hospitals asked me to help develop their whistleblower policies. Without planning it, I had found a new career path in patient advocacy. The little girl who had nearly died on that operating table turned 13. Her mother sent me a photo from her birthday party. She was laughing, surrounded by friends, her surgical scars hidden beneath a bright sweater. She was alive because one nurse had refused to stay silent. 6 months after the settlement, I returned to the hospital for the first Excellence Award ceremony. Walking through those familiar hallways was harder than I expected. Memories flooded back of the intimidation, the isolation, the systematic destruction of my career. But I also saw changes. New posters outlined reporting procedures for safety concerns. Staff members who had once avoided me now approached with respect. The toxic culture Nakamura had fostered was slowly being replaced by one that valued transparency. The ceremony was held in the auditorium where Nakamura had once held her threatening all-staff meetings. Now, the new chief medical officer spoke about the importance of moral courage in healthcare. When they announced the award in my name, the entire room stood and applauded. The first recipient was a young nurse who had reported medication errors despite pressure to stay quiet. She had learned from our case that speaking up was not only right, but now protected. As I handed her the award, I saw my own journey reflected in her brave actions. That night, I had dinner with my mother and the nurses who had become my chosen family. We had all found different paths forward. Some had returned to nursing at other hospitals. Others had moved into healthcare administration or education. We had survived and even thrived despite everything. As I drove home, I passed the apartment where I had lived during the worst of the retaliation. New tenants occupied it now, unaware of the desperate nights I had spent there surrounded by legal documents. I had moved on, but the memories remained. My new position as a patient safety consultant kept me busy. I traveled to hospitals across the region, helping them develop better reporting systems. Each institution had its own culture, but I recognized the same patterns of fear and silence that had enabled tragedy at my hospital. During one consultation, I encountered a nurse who reminded me of myself years earlier. She had witnessed something wrong but was afraid to report it. I spent hours with her, sharing my experience and explaining the protections now in place. When she finally filed her report, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced since leaving bedside nursing. The criminal trials concluded with mixed results. Nakamura was convicted on several charges and sentenced to 5 years in prison. It seemed insufficient for the harm she had caused, but it sent a clear message to other administrators who might protect dangerous physicians. Okafor pleaded guilty to avoid a longer sentence. He received 3 years and would never practice medicine again. During his sentencing, families of patients he had harmed gave impact statements. Their pain was evident, but so was their relief that he could no longer hurt others. Dr. Yamoto completed her probation and counseling. She reached out once, sending a letter apologizing for her role in enabling Okafor. She was working at a rehabilitation center, trying to rebuild her life and career. I didn't respond, but I hoped she had truly learned from her choices. A year after the settlement, the Oversight Committee released its first report. The hospital had made significant progress in creating a culture of safety. Reporting of concerns had increased dramatically. Several impaired physicians had been identified and helped before they could harm patients. The report specifically credited the courage of nurses who had risked everything to expose the truth. It acknowledged that real change only came after whistleblowers forced accountability. The hospital was becoming what it should have been all along, a place where patient safety came first. I continued speaking at conferences and consulting with hospitals. My story had become part of a larger movement to protect healthcare whistleblowers. Laws were being strengthened, policies improved, and cultures slowly changing. Progress was incremental but real. Sometimes late at night, I wondered what would have happened if I had stayed silent that day in the operating room. How many more patients would Okafor have harmed? How many more nurses would have been driven out for speaking up? My conscience knew I had made the only possible choice. The financial settlement had provided security, but the real reward was seeing systemic change. Every new policy protecting whistleblowers, every nurse who felt safe reporting concerns, every patient saved from a preventable error validated our sacrifice. My relationship with my mother had grown stronger through the ordeal. From crushed careers to consultant fees, that's quite the career pivot for our whistleblowing hero, turning trauma into speaking tours while Nakamura trades power suits for prison jumpsuits. She had been my anchor when everything else was falling apart. Now, we met weekly for dinner, no longer needing to discuss legal strategies or financial worries. We could simply enjoy each other's company. The nurses from our support group remained close. We celebrated each other's victories and provided comfort during setbacks. Catherine had become a nursing instructor, teaching ethics to the next generation. Sebastian had founded a nonprofit supporting healthcare whistleblowers. We had all found meaning in our trauma. 2 years after that fateful surgery, I received an unexpected message. The little girl, now a thriving teenager, wanted to meet me. Her mother arranged for us to have lunch. I was nervous, unsure what to say to the child whose near death had changed so many lives. She was vibrant and full of life, showing no signs of her ordeal except for the scar hidden beneath her shirt. She thanked me for saving her life, though I tried to explain that many people had played a role. She insisted that my willingness to speak up had made the difference. As we talked, she revealed her own plans to become a doctor. She wanted to be the kind of physician who would never operate impaired, who would speak up when she saw wrongdoing. My actions had inspired her career choice. It was a profound moment of coming full circle. The hospital where everything had happened continued to transform. New leadership had embraced transparency and accountability. They regularly invited me to speak to their staff about the importance of reporting concerns. The place that had once tried to destroy me now held me up as an example. I never returned to bedside nursing. The trauma ran too deep, and my new path felt more impactful. Through consulting and advocacy, I could affect change at multiple institutions. I could prevent other nurses from facing what I had endured. My life had found a new rhythm. Days filled with meaningful work, evenings with friends who understood my journey, weekends volunteering at free clinics where I could still use my nursing skills. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it had purpose and meaning. The Excellence Award in my name continued annually. Each recipient reminded me why the fight had been worthwhile. Young nurses who refused to compromise patient safety, who spoke truth to power despite the risks. They gave me hope for healthcare's future. Sometimes I encountered former colleagues who had stayed silent during my ordeal. Some apologized for their cowardice. Others still avoided eye contact. I held no grudges. Fear is powerful, and not everyone can overcome it. I was just grateful that when the moment came, I had found the courage to act. The ripple effects of our case continued spreading. Other states strengthened their whistleblower protections. Medical schools added curriculum on reporting impaired colleagues. Healthcare systems invested in creating safer reporting cultures. Change was slow, but undeniable. On quiet evenings, I often thought about Dr. Okafor's victims, not just the little girl who survived, but all the patients harmed over the years while administrators looked away. Their suffering had finally led to justice and reform. Their pain had not been in vain. My apartment now was modest but comfortable, decorated with thank you notes from nurses I had helped and photos from speaking engagements. It represented a life rebuilt from ruins, different from what I had imagined, but authentic and meaningful. The settlement money remained largely untouched, a safety net I hoped never to need again. Financial security couldn't erase the memories of selling possessions to survive, but it provided peace of mind. I could continue advocacy work without worrying about income. Patricia Chen and I stayed in contact. She had used our case to build a practice focused on protecting healthcare whistleblowers. She called occasionally with updates on new cases, always reminding me that my courage had paved the way for others to seek justice. The hospital's transformation became a model for others. They published their journey from corruption to accountability, acknowledging the painful catalyst that forced change. Administrators from other institutions visited to learn from their mistakes and successes. I found unexpected joy in mentoring young nurses who reached out after hearing my story. They faced ethical dilemmas in their own practice and needed guidance. I helped them navigate reporting systems, understand their rights, and find the courage to do what was right. My physical health had recovered from the stress of the ordeal. Regular exercise and therapy had helped heal both body and mind. The nightmares had faded, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and purpose. I had survived something that could have destroyed me. 3 years after the settlement, the Oversight Committee released its final report. The hospital had successfully transformed its culture. Patient safety metrics had improved dramatically. Staff satisfaction scores were at record highs. The toxic environment that had enabled tragedy was gone. The committee specifically noted that sustainable change had only been possible because whistleblowers had forced accountability. They recommended that all healthcare institutions proactively create safe reporting systems rather than wait for a crisis. Our suffering had become a cautionary tale. I continued traveling and speaking, but now from a place of strength rather than trauma. My message had evolved from a warning about retaliation to a hopeful vision of healthcare systems that valued transparency and patient safety above profits and reputations. The young nurse who had received the first Excellence Award in my name reached out. She had advanced to a leadership position and was implementing innovative safety protocols. She credited my story with giving her the courage to always put patients first. The legacy was continuing. Life had settled into a fulfilling routine. Morning consultations with hospitals seeking to improve their cultures, afternoons writing policy recommendations and safety protocols, evenings with friends who had become family through shared struggle, weekends volunteering and mentoring. The anger that had once consumed me had transformed into determination to prevent others from suffering as we had. Every policy changed, every nurse empowered to speak up, every patient protected from preventable harm honored our sacrifice. My mother remained my strongest supporter. She had watched her daughter nearly destroyed for doing the right thing, then rebuilt into someone stronger. Our weekly dinners were celebrations of survival and resilience. She was proud of who I had become through the fire. I occasionally wondered about the path not taken, the quiet nursing career I might have had if I had stayed silent. But regret was pointless. That little girl was alive because I spoke up. Countless other patients were safer because we had exposed the truth. The price had been high, but the value was immeasurable. My new life had meaning beyond what I could have imagined in those dark days of retaliation. I had found purpose in my pain, transformation in my trauma. The system that tried to silence me had instead amplified my voice across the healthcare community. As I prepared for another speaking engagement, I looked at my nursing license one final time before packing it away. It represented a career I no longer practiced, but values I still upheld. First, do no harm. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. Speak truth even when power threatens silence. The audience that night was filled with nursing students, young faces eager to begin their careers. I told them my story not to frighten them, but to prepare them. Healthcare needs nurses brave enough to challenge wrongdoing, strong enough to withstand retaliation, and committed enough to persist until justice prevails. Their questions showed they understood. They wanted to know how to recognize impairment, how to report safely, how to support colleagues who spoke up. They were entering healthcare with eyes open to both its nobility and its potential for corruption. They would be better guardians of patient safety because of what we had endured. Walking to my car after the talk, I felt the satisfaction of work well done. Another group of future nurses equipped to protect patients. Another institution examining its culture. Another step toward the healthcare system patients deserved. My phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. The hospital was dedicating a new patient safety center in honor of all the nurses who had risked their careers to expose the truth. They wanted us all to attend the opening. It was another sign of how far we had come from those days of intimidation and silence. I drove home through the city where my life had been shattered and rebuilt, past Past the hospital where I had once worked, now transformed. Past the courthouse where justice had finally prevailed. Past the small apartment where I had nearly given up hope. Each landmark told part of the story. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new institutions to help transform, new nurses to mentor. But tonight, I simply felt grateful. Grateful for the strength to speak up. Grateful for the allies who had supported me. Grateful for the opportunity to turn trauma into positive change. The little girl whose blood had pooled on that operating room floor was now a healthy teenager planning her own medical career. Dangerous physicians could no longer practice with impunity. Nurses felt safer reporting concerns. Administrators understood the cost of prioritizing profits over patients. We had changed things. My life was nothing like I had planned, but it was everything it needed to be. I had found purpose in advocacy, family and fellow survivors, and meaning in the struggle. The nurse who had walked into that operating room years ago would barely recognize who I had become. As I entered my apartment, I saw the framed photo the girl's mother had sent from her daughter's recent birthday. A vibrant teenager laughing with friends, alive because one nurse had refused to be silent. It was worth everything we had sacrificed. I prepared for bed, knowing tomorrow would bring new opportunities to protect patients and empower healthcare workers. The fight for transparency and accountability in healthcare would continue. But tonight, I could rest knowing we had made a difference. The truth had indeed prevailed, not through dramatic revelations or sudden justice, but through the grinding work of legal battles, policy changes, and cultural transformation. We had torn down a corrupt system and helped build something better in its place. My story had become part of a larger narrative about healthcare accountability, not a tale of individual heroism, but of collective courage in the face of institutional intimidation. We had proven that ordinary nurses could challenge powerful systems and win. Sleep came easier now than in those fearful nights during the retaliation. No more checking door cameras or varying routes home. No more anonymous threats or manufactured evidence. Just the peace of knowing I had done what was right, whatever the cost. The morning would bring new challenges and opportunities, but I would face them with the strength gained from surviving the worst. I had been tested in ways I never imagined and emerged not unscathed but unbroken. My journey from bedside nurse to patient advocate had been painful but necessary. Every speaking engagement, every policy consultation, every mentoring session honored those who had suffered in silence. Their voices now spoke through mine. The Excellence Award in my name would continue recognizing nurses who showed moral courage. The oversight policies would keep protecting patients. The cultural changes would persist beyond any individual. We had created lasting change from temporary suffering. I closed my eyes, grateful for how far we had come. The little girl had her new heart and her whole life ahead. The dangerous doctor could never harm another patient. The corrupt administrator faced justice. And I had found purpose in the ruins of my nursing career. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight there was peace. The peace of battles won, justice served, and patients protected. The peace of knowing that speaking truth to power, however costly, had been the right choice. The peace of a life rebuilt with purpose and meaning. I know y'all don't mess with the commentary, but I like interacting with you guys in the story. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next.